The Pursuit of Divine Perfection, Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper. The Duke's messenger found Leonardo da Vinci exactly where he always was. Perched precariously on wooden scaffolding, nose inches from the wall, studying John the Apostle's face with the intensity of a man possessed. The great artist hadn't moved for hours. His fingers, stained with pigment and chalk, traced invisible lines in the air as he contemplated yet another adjustment to the fresco that was slowly driving Milan mad. "Maestro!" the messenger called up, his voice echoing through the refectory of Santa Maria delle Grazie. "His Grace demands to know when you will finish." Leonardo barely turned his head. In the dim light of dusk, his grey beard caught the last rays of sun streaming through the high windows. The wall before him showed 13 faces in various states of completion, some exquisitely rendered, others mere ghostly outlines. At the center sat Christ, his expression a miracle of subtle emotion that had taken 3 months to perfect. But John's face still wasn't right. "Tell His Grace," Leonardo said softly, reaching for his brush, "that finding the face of divinity among mortal men is not a task that can be rushed." He dipped the brush in paint, then paused. "And remind him that when God created the world, He didn't do it in a single day." The messenger shuffled nervously. "The Duke says you spend more time studying the way light falls than actually painting. He says you waste hours watching people in the market, sketching their expressions when you should be here, working." A slight smile crossed Leonardo's face. "And that," he said, "is precisely why this will be more than just another painting of 13 men at dinner." He turned back to the wall, his mind already racing with calculations of light, perspective, and the mathematical principles that governed them both. In his workshop across the city lay notebooks filled with hundreds of sketches, studies of facial muscles during emotional outbursts, detailed drawings of how fabric draped over bent knees, diagrams of how light reflected in the pupils of men in the throes of betrayal. Because Leonardo da Vinci had long ago discovered that to capture the divine, one first had to understand everything. From the curl of a finger to the flight of birds, from the flow of water to the geometry of God's creation. His pursuit of this understanding would create masterpieces, but it would also lead him down paths no artist had ever dared to tread. The messenger's footsteps faded away, leaving Leonardo alone again with his unfinished apostles. As darkness crept into the refectory, he remained on his perch, a solitary figure illuminated by candlelight, hunting perfection in the space between art and science, between heaven and earth, between the possible and the divine. This was how greatness was born, not in broad, confident strokes, but in endless questions, relentless observation, and the courage to see the world as no one else could. This was the story of Leonardo da Vinci, the man who dared to know everything. Leonardo, a child of 2 worlds. On a spring morning in 1452, a notary named Ser Piero da Vinci walked down the dusty road to record the birth of his illegitimate son. The child's mother, Caterina, a peasant girl from the small village of Anciano, would soon disappear from the official record, but she had already given her son the 2 gifts that would shape his destiny: a piercing gaze that missed nothing and hands that would never stop moving. The world Leonardo was born into was one of stark divisions. Florence, the nearest city of consequence, was experiencing an explosion of art and learning that would later be called the Renaissance. But here in Vinci, perched on the slopes of Monte Albano, life followed rhythms as old as the Etruscan walls that still dotted the hillsides. While learned men in Florence debated Plato and commissioned frescoes, farmers still consulted the phases of the moon and told stories of ancient spirits in the woods. Young Leonardo inhabited both worlds. In his grandfather's workshop, he learned the precise language of contracts and legal documents, watching as words fixed agreements into permanence. But it was in the hills where he truly came alive. He would disappear for hours, returning with pockets full of unusual stones and papers covered in drawings of twisted vines and whirling leaves. When his uncle Francesco found him dissecting a flower petal by petal, sketching each layer with remarkable precision, The old man didn't know whether to be proud or concerned. The boy's questions erupted like water from a spring. Why were birds' wings curved just so? How did light change the color of olive leaves when the wind blew? What made river waters spiral in such perfect patterns? His relatives soon learned that any answer would spawn 3 new questions, each more peculiar than the last. But it was Leonardo's drawings that truly set him apart. By age 8, he could capture the flight of a dragonfly with a few quick strokes that seemed to vibrate with life. Nature became his first and most faithful teacher. While other children played at soldiers, Leonardo spent hours watching spiders spin their webs, measuring the geometric perfection of their work with increasingly sophisticated drawings. He developed a habit of carrying a small notebook tucked into his belt, filling its pages with sketches of everything from the way a cat's spine curved when it pounced to the precise arrangement of petals in a blooming thistle. This obsession with observation might have relegated him to the life of an eccentric countryside dreamer, had fate not intervened in the form of his father's ambition. Ser Piero, whose notary practice in Florence was flourishing, began to spend more time in the city. On one visit, he took some of his son's drawings to show a client. The client, it happened, was Andrea del Verrocchio, the most renowned artist and craftsman in Florence. What Verrocchio saw in those drawings would change the course of art history. They weren't the careful copies that apprentices spent years perfecting, nor were they the clumsy attempts of a countryside amateur. These drawings seemed to capture not just the appearance of things, but their essential nature, the underlying principles that governed their form and movement. They were the work of someone who didn't just look at the world, but saw through it. Within months, Leonardo was headed to Florence. He carried with him a bundle of drawings, a head full of questions, and an approach to understanding the world that would eventually shatter the boundaries between art and science. The countryside boy who had learned to see magic in the ordinary was about to enter a world where magic was being replaced by something even more powerful: knowledge. Behind him, the hills of Vinci stretched up toward the morning sun. The same light that had fascinated him in the olive groves now gilded the towers of Florence in the distance. Leonardo was leaving one world for another, but he would spend the rest of his life building bridges between them. In his mind, they were never truly separate, just different aspects of the same grand mystery, waiting to be understood by anyone with the courage to really look. The boy who asked why. Leonardo's quest for understanding. Andrea del Verrocchio's workshop buzzed like a hive. Bronze workers poured molten metal into molds, apprentices ground pigments with mechanical precision, and craftsmen hammered gold leaf so thin it seemed to float in the air. Into this symphony of creation walked a gangly teenager whose questions would soon upend everything. Why does bronze glow that particular color when it's heated? Leonardo asked on his first morning, interrupting Verrocchio's carefully planned introduction to workshop safety. Before the master could answer, the boy had already moved on. And why do the flames turn green when copper filings fall in them? Could we make other colors? What if Verrocchio, who had trained some of Florence's finest artists, had never encountered a mind quite like this? Most apprentices learned by copying, following instructions with dutiful precision. Leonardo copied too, brilliantly, but his margins overflowed with annotations about muscle attachments, notes on the play of light, and endless technical questions about why things worked the way they did. The other apprentices mocked him at first. They called him the philosopher behind his back, rolling their eyes at his habit of stopping mid-task to sketch a passing cloud formation, or the way a cat's pupils change shape in different light. But the laughter died when Leonardo's first works emerged. His drawings didn't just capture appearances, they seemed to breathe. In 1472, the ledger of the Company of St. Luke recorded a new master painter, Leonardo di Ser Piero da Vinci. But the official recognition hardly captured the revolution brewing in the young artist's mind. While his contemporaries studied perspective by reciting mathematical formulas, Leonardo filled notebooks with direct observations of how distance affected the color of mountains. When others learned anatomy from ancient texts, he struck a deal with a hospital gravedigger for access to corpses, producing drawings of the human body that wouldn't be equaled for centuries. The turning point came with the baptism of Christ. Verrocchio had assigned his promising student to paint an angel in the corner of his newest altarpiece. Leonardo approached the task with his characteristic thoroughness, spending weeks studying how light affected the translucence of skin, how hair moved in wind, how fabric draped over shoulders. When the work was finally unveiled, the result stunned Florence's artistic community. Next to Leonardo's luminous angel, Verrocchio's figures looked stiff and lifeless. According to Vasari, writing years later, Verrocchio was so humbled by his pupil's superior skill that he vowed never to paint again. The story is probably apocryphal, but it captures a fundamental truth. Art in Florence would never be the same. Leonardo had demonstrated that technical perfection wasn't enough. True mastery required understanding the underlying principles of nature itself. The young master's reputation grew, but so did his frustrations with Florence's artistic conventions. Why paint figures against flat gold backgrounds when nature offered such rich complexity? Why settle for traditional techniques when experiment and observation could reveal new ones? His workshop became a laboratory where art and science merged. He invented new types of paint, experimented with revolutionary techniques for casting bronze, and filled notebook after notebook with observations on everything from the growth patterns of trees to the mechanics of bird flight. One day, a fellow artist found Leonardo staring at the same wall for hours. "What could be so fascinating about a blank surface?" he asked. Leonardo turned, his eyes bright with discovery. "Blank? Look closer. In these cracks and stains are battles, landscapes, fantastic creatures, all waiting to be discovered. Everything speaks to those who know how to listen." This was Leonardo's gift to the world, the revelation that art wasn't about following rules or copying what came before. It was about seeing, truly seeing, the wonder that surrounded us. His endless questions weren't distractions from his work, they were his work. Each query opened new doors, revealed new connections, pushed the boundaries of what was possible. As the 1470s drew to a close, Leonardo's notebooks grew thicker, his experiments more daring. Florence buzzed with rumors about the extraordinary young artist who could paint like an angel and think like a philosopher. But Leonardo was already looking beyond the city's walls. His mind, ever restless, sought bigger challenges, grander patronage, and new mysteries to unravel. Milan beckoned, promising opportunities that would test even his boundless talents. He would leave Florence as he had entered it, burning with questions. But now they were different questions, bigger ones. Not just how and why, but what if? What if art could capture not just appearances, but the very essence of life? What if one could understand everything? And what if understanding wasn't enough? What if one could create something entirely new? Leonardo's flourishing genius in Florence. One balmy evening in 1478, Lorenzo de' Medici held court in the Palazzo Medici's garden. Scholars debated Plato, poets recited verses, and musicians played softly in the shadows. But the magnificent one's attention was fixed on a tall figure sketching in the corner, capturing the scene with uncanny speed. "Show me," Lorenzo commanded, and Leonardo's notebook revealed not just the gathering, but something more. The mathematical patterns in the musicians' harmonies translated into visual rhythms that danced across the page. The Medici court was unlike anything Leonardo had known. Here, a man's worth was measured not by his family name, but by the fertility of his mind. Marsilio Ficino expounded on the harmony of the spheres, while Poliziano wove classical myths into new forms. In this hothouse of genius, Leonardo's peculiar blend of arts and sciences found fertile soil. When he explained his theory that painting was a science because it dealt with mathematical principles of light and perspective, the scholars nodded. When he argued that the soul might be found in the brain's ventricles rather than the heart, the physicians listened. But theory wasn't enough in Lorenzo's Florence. The city demanded spectacle, and Leonardo delivered. For the Carnival of 1479, he designed a rotating planetary system that transformed the Piazza della Signoria into a living model of the cosmos. Spectators gasped as gilded spheres wheeled overhead, each planet's motion precisely calculated. Yet while the crowd celebrated, Leonardo was already sketching improvements, wondering if the same principles could lift a man into the air. His studio became a cabinet of curiosities. Merchants brought him exotic specimens. A chameleon whose color-changing skin launched weeks of investigation. A fossilized seashell found in the mountains that sparked theories about the Earth's ancient past. He filled jars with water and drops of milk to study how light bent through liquids, and kept a menagerie of small animals to observe their movements. Visitors reported strange machines under construction, including a mechanical lion that could walk and open its chest to reveal lilies, though Leonardo refused to explain how it worked. The commissions flowed in, but Leonardo's working methods increasingly frustrated his patrons. He would accept a project with enthusiasm, produce countless preparatory studies, then become distracted by some scientific question the work had sparked. The Augustinian monks of San Donato a Scopeto learned this the hard way. Their commission for an adoration of the Magi became an obsession not with the holy scene, but with the psychology of wonder itself. Leonardo covered the underdrawing with hundreds of figures in various states of amazement, each face a study in the physical manifestations of awe. Then, fascinated by how emotion registered in facial muscles, he abandoned the painting to dissect human heads. But it was his private investigations that truly revealed his evolving genius. In the dead of night, Leonardo would visit the Santa Maria Nuova Hospital's morgue. By candlelight, he peeled back layers of human anatomy, making discoveries that wouldn't be confirmed for centuries. His notebooks from this period show the first accurate depictions of the human spine, detailed studies of the heart's chambers, and startlingly modern theories about blood flow. When a guard caught him sketching a corpse and reported him to the authorities, Leonardo's response was pure pragmatism. He began paying hospital workers to notify him of interesting deaths. The artist's growing reputation attracted both admiration and suspicion. His left-handed mirror writing and refusal to attend Mass sparked whispers of sorcery. His close friendship with the young Salai, a beautiful but troublesome apprentice who moved into his household, fed Florence's rumor mills. When an anonymous accusation of sodomy appeared in the infamous tamburi, the public denunciation boxes, Leonardo found himself briefly imprisoned. Though quickly released for lack of evidence, the experience left its mark. His notebooks from this period show designs for flying machines alongside bitter observations about human nature and justice. Yet even as Florence's politics grew treacherous, Leonardo's mind soared higher. He filled pages with designs for flying machines based on his studies of birds and bats. He discovered that birds' wings created lift by manipulating air pressure, a principle that wouldn't be formally understood for centuries. His drawings showed planes with adjustable wings, primitive helicopters, and even a parachute design that would successfully be tested 500 years later. When word came that Ludovico Sforza, the ambitious regent of Milan, was seeking military engineers and court artists, Leonardo saw his chance. He composed his famous letter, less a job application than a manifesto of technological revolution. He promised bridges that could be assembled in hours, tanks that could break any enemy line, machines to drain moats and scale walls. Almost as an afterthought, he mentioned he could also paint. On a crisp autumn morning in 1482, Leonardo packed his notebooks, gathered his most promising apprentices, and turned his back on Florence. He left behind unfinished paintings, unpaid debts, and a city that had proved both cradle and cage to his genius. Ahead lay Milan, where he would attempt his grandest projects yet, and discover that the gap between vision and reality could break even the most universal of minds. The road north wound through the Apennines. Leonardo, ever observant, noted how the mountains' layers told stories of ancient seas, how the winds shaped both clouds and rocks, how nature's mathematics revealed themselves in the spiral of a snail's shell by the roadside. Each observation filled another page. Each question led to 10 more. He was 30 years old, and the world's mysteries were only beginning to unfold. Milan's new master, Leonardo's impact and innovations. Ludovico Sforza's court astrologer had predicted that a man would arrive from Florence who would change the face of Milan. When Leonardo strode into the Castello Sforzesco in 1482, the regent might have been disappointed at first. Instead of the martial bearing expected of a military engineer, here was an elegant man in a rose-colored tunic who carried a silver lyre shaped like a horse's skull, an instrument he had designed and crafted himself. Then Leonardo began to speak. He unrolled drawings of war machines that seemed pulled from fever dreams, giant crossbows that could hurl burning projectiles, multi-barreled organs that rained death, armored vehicles that moved like monstrous crabs across battlefields. But it was his sketch of a bronze horse, larger than any ever created, that caught Ludovico's eye. Here was a monument worthy of the Sforza dynasty, one that would outshine even the ancient wonders. Milan opened new horizons for Leonardo's genius. Unlike Florence's mercantile republic, the Sforza court valued spectacle and mechanical ingenuity. When Leonardo proposed a mechanical lion that could walk up to the French ambassador and split open to shower lilies at his feet, Ludovico didn't ask about cost. He asked when it could be ready. When Leonardo wanted to study optics, he was given rooms with views of the Alps to observe how distance affected the color of mountains. The bronze horse became an obsession. Leonardo approached the project with characteristic thoroughness, filling notebooks with studies of equine anatomy and movement. He traveled to Hungary to study the kingdom's finest steeds, measuring every muscle and sinew. His designs called for a horse 24 feet high, requiring unprecedented innovations in bronze casting techniques. The clay model alone took years to perfect, becoming a tourist attraction as it rose in the Castello's courtyard. But while the horse captured public imagination, Leonardo's private studies ventured into territory that would have shocked his patrons. In the depths of night, in a secret studio beneath the Hospital of Santo Spirito, he performed dissections that revolutionized anatomical understanding. His drawings from this period show the first accurate depictions of the human fetus in the womb, complete with detailed studies of the placenta and umbilical cord. When a particularly well-preserved corpse arrived, he would work through the night, racing decay, his left hand filling pages with mirror writing that only he could easily read. The duchy's leading mathematicians found themselves drawn into Leonardo's orbit. When he wasn't designing elaborate pageants for Sforza weddings, including mechanical clouds that rained flowers and automated celestial spheres, he was debating geometric principles with Fra Luca Pacioli. Together, they explored the divine proportion, with Leonardo illustrating Pacioli's De Divina Proportione with intricate geometric drawings that seemed to pulse with inner life. By day, Leonardo played the court artist, painting portraits of Ludovico's mistresses and designing elaborate theatrical productions. But his notebooks reveal a mind racing far ahead of his time. He correctly described how the aortic valve worked years before William Harvey formalized circulation theory. He drew cross-sections of muscles that wouldn't be properly documented until the invention of MRI machines. His studies of light and shadow led him to understand aspects of optics that wouldn't be formally proven for centuries. The workshop he established became a laboratory of innovation. Among his students was Salai, whose beauty inspired some of Leonardo's most enigmatic drawings, and Giacomo Salai, whose mathematical genius helped refine many mechanical designs. They experimented with new painting techniques, including a disastrous attempt to paint the Last Supper using an experimental mixture that began to deteriorate, even as Leonardo was still perfecting the apostles' faces. But dark clouds were gathering. French armies threatened Milan's borders, and bronze meant for the horse was diverted to cast cannons. Leonardo's military innovations proved more theoretical than practical. His tank designs, while ingenious, would have been impossible to build with 15th century technology. As Milan's political situation deteriorated, his position grew precarious. The final blow came in 1494, when Charles III of France launched his Italian campaign. The bronze horse's clay model, standing uncast in its courtyard, became a target for French archers. Leonardo watched as 2 decades of work literally melted in the rain. In his notebooks from this period, alongside designs for flying machines and hydraulic pumps, appeared dark drawings of apocalyptic floods and burning cities. Yet even as Milan fell, Leonardo's mind soared. His studies of birds and air currents intensified, filling notebooks with designs for flying machines that ranged from practical gliders to fantastic ornithopters. He discovered principles of aerodynamics that wouldn't be formally understood for 4 centuries. In the margins of these designs, he wrote with uncharacteristic emotion. "Once you have tasted flight, you will forever walk the earth with your eyes turned skyward, for there you have been, and there you will always long to return." As the century drew to a close, Leonardo prepared once again for exile. He packed his notebooks, now numbering in the thousands of pages, and looked toward new horizons. Behind him lay an unfinished horse, a deteriorating Last Supper, and countless innovations that had pushed the boundaries of what seemed possible. Ahead lay new patrons, new cities, and new mysteries to unravel. He was approaching 50, but his greatest works and his deepest questions still lay ahead. The confluence of art and science, Leonardo's legacy. In a dimly lit room in Milan, 1495, Leonardo conducted an experiment that would transform the history of art. He positioned a subject before a glass pane and traced the outline of their shadow, discovering that perspective wasn't just mathematics. It was the science of how the eye itself perceives depth. While other artists struggled with rigid formulas, Leonardo unlocked the secrets of atmospheric perspective by studying how air itself changed the colors of distant mountains. His breakthrough came through smoke. While others saw only haze, Leonardo observed how particles in air created subtle gradations of tone. He called this effect sfumato, from the Italian word for smoke, and used it to create an illusion of depth so profound that viewers of his paintings would reach out to touch what seemed like real space. The human body became his obsession. In the hospital of Santa Maria Nuova, Leonardo made a discovery that had eluded every anatomist before him. The heart had 4 chambers, not 2 as Galen had claimed centuries earlier. His drawings showed the first accurate depictions of the tricuspid valve, with notes describing how blood flowed through each chamber. At night, he would inject melted wax into brain ventricles to understand their shape, making casts that revealed the structure of consciousness itself. But Leonardo's most profound insight came through an unlikely source: river currents. Watching water flow around obstacles, he recognized patterns that appeared everywhere in nature, in the way blood moved through veins, how air flowed over a bird's wing, how hair curled in waves. He filled entire notebooks with studies of these fluid dynamics, creating the first known visualizations of turbulence and vortex behavior. The workshop became a laboratory where art and science merged. Leonardo invented new pigments that could capture subtle variations in light, developed mechanical grinding techniques for creating smoother colors, and designed his own tools for applying paint in microscopically thin layers. His assistants learned to prepare panels with layers of gesso so fine they resembled polished marble. In 1497, between sessions painting the Last Supper, Leonardo made a breakthrough in human proportion. The Vitruvian Man emerged not just as a drawing, but as a proof of divine mathematics. Unlike earlier attempts to square the circle of human form, Leonardo's figure moved, breathed, lived within its geometric constraints. The accompanying notes revealed calculations so precise that modern computers would later confirm their accuracy. His studies of light led him to understand reflection and refraction centuries before optical science could explain them. He discovered how the eye's pupil contracted and expanded, how the retina processed images, and why the sky appears blue, a phenomenon that wouldn't be fully explained until Lord Rayleigh's work in the 19th century. In his notebooks, he wrote, "The eye, which is called the window of the soul, is the principal means by which the central sense can most completely and abundantly appreciate the infinite works of nature. The culmination of these studies appeared in an unprecedented experiment. Leonardo created a camera obscura room large enough to stand in, projecting an inverted image of the outside world onto a wall. Inside this giant eye, he studied how light behaved, how colors mixed, how depth and distance could be measured through careful observation of light's behavior. His botanical studies revolutionized scientific illustration. While others drew plants as flat, decorative elements, Leonardo showed them responding to gravity and light, revealing the mathematical patterns of leaf arrangement, phyllotaxis, that botanists wouldn't formally describe for 3 centuries. He discovered that tree rings indicated age and climate conditions, and that branches followed precise mathematical ratios in their thickness and spacing. The mechanical arts weren't spared his analytical eye. He developed a new theory of friction through experiments with weights and inclined planes. His studies of gears and levers went beyond mere mechanics to explore the underlying principles of force and motion. One notebook shows the first known designs for ball bearings, next to calculations proving their efficiency. In 1498, Leonardo undertook his most daring fusion of art and science. For Isabella d'Este's portrait, he attempted to capture not just her appearance, but the actual mechanics of her smile, the way muscles moved beneath skin, how emotions registered in microscopic changes of expression. The studies for this project filled a notebook with detailed anatomical drawings of facial muscles, alongside observations about the psychology of human expression that anticipated Darwin's work on emotions by over 3 centuries. But his greatest experiment remained unfinished. In a locked room, accessible only to him, Leonardo worked on a portrait that would embody everything he had learned about light, perspective, anatomy, and human expression. The subject was a Florentine merchant's wife, and the painting would become known as the Mona Lisa. Into this single work, Leonardo poured decades of scientific observation about how light behaves, how atmospheric perspective works, how facial muscles create expressions, and how the human eye perceives depth. As the 15th century drew to a close, Leonardo's notebooks bulged with discoveries that wouldn't be confirmed for centuries. The mathematical principles of tree branching, the way the heart's valves worked, the dynamics of fluid turbulence, the nature of light and shadow. Yet he never published his findings. When asked why, he would simply turn to another blank page and continue observing, measuring, questioning, pushing ever deeper into nature's mysteries. His contemporaries called him a genius, but they didn't know the half of it. In an age before scientific instruments, before calculus, before the scientific method itself, Leonardo had created his own system for understanding the world, one that erased the boundaries between art and science, between observation and imagination, between the possible and the divine. The enigma of Mona Lisa's smile. The city was at war with itself. While Michelangelo and Leonardo faced off in the Great Council Hall, each tasked with creating a battle fresco to outdo the other, a merchant named Francesco del Giocondo made a seemingly simple request: a portrait of his wife, Madonna Lisa. No one could have known this modest commission would consume Leonardo for the next 16 years, becoming the most enigmatic painting in history. The preparation alone revealed Leonardo's obsession with perfection. He designed a special chair with adjustable arms and back, allowing his subject to maintain the same pose comfortably for hours. Behind her, he hung thin silk sheets that caught the changing light, studying how shadows moved across fabric throughout the day. Musicians played softly during sittings, not for ambience, but because Leonardo had discovered that certain harmonies caused subtle changes in facial expressions. His studio became a laboratory of perception. Leonardo positioned mirrors around Lisa to study how light reflected off skin from multiple angles simultaneously. He ground his own pigments to unprecedented fineness, creating layers so thin they were nearly transparent. Some areas of the painting contained more than 30 glazes, each barely thicker than a spider's silk. Between sessions, he dissected human faces to understand exactly how the muscles beneath the skin created expressions. The revolutionary nature of the portrait emerged slowly. Traditional portraits showed subjects in profile or straight on, like coins or icons. Leonardo positioned Lisa at a three-quarter angle, her body turned one way, her face another, a pose that suggested movement, life, thought. The curved lines of her hair and clothing echoed the shapes in the landscape behind her, creating what Leonardo called the harmony of correspondences. But it was the smile that became his obsession. In his notebooks from this period appear hundreds of small studies of lips and eyes, alongside calculations about how light travels through the atmosphere and reflects off curved surfaces. Leonardo discovered that the human eye processes different parts of the face with different types of vision. The central fovea sees detail and color, but isn't good at detecting shadows, while peripheral vision better perceives darkness and light. He used this knowledge to create a smile that literally moves, visible clearly from the corner of one's eye, yet seeming to vanish when looked at directly. The background wasn't mere decoration. Those strange, twisted rocks. Leonardo had spent years studying how water carved stone over millennia. The winding path, based on his research into how rivers meandered across plains. Even the misty atmosphere was scientifically precise. He had calculated exactly how particles in air scattered light at different distances. Every element was both observation and experiment. As word of the unusual portrait spread, Leonardo's workshop filled with visitors hoping to glimpse it. Raphael came several times, studying how Leonardo achieved such depth with color. Young artists were particularly fascinated by the hands, which seemed more alive than any painted before. What they couldn't see were the dozens of anatomical studies behind those hands. Leonardo had dissected arm muscles to understand exactly how tension and relaxation shaped flesh. The painting became a repository for everything Leonardo had discovered about vision and perception. He applied his research into optical illusions, using shadows and highlights so subtle they seemed to shift with the viewer's position. The corners of Lisa's mouth contained microscopically thin lines that created what modern neuroscientists call spatial frequency. The painting literally plays with the way human vision processes images. In 1506, Leonardo made a crucial discovery about human sight. The eye's retina processed light and shadow differently than color. He used this knowledge to create areas of the painting that seemed to change depending on how long one looked at them. The effect was so subtle that it would take 500 years and modern scanning technology to prove how he achieved it. As years passed, the portrait became more than a commission. It was a scientific instrument testing the limits of human perception. Leonardo kept it with him constantly, adding layers so subtle they were almost invisible, adjusting tones that only he could see needed changing. When asked why he spent so much time on a single portrait, he replied that he was not just painting a woman, but investigating the nature of life itself. The Florentine government tried repeatedly to force Leonardo to finish their battle fresco instead. He responded by diving deeper into his research, filling notebooks with studies of how emotions registered in minute muscle movements, how atmospheric perspective affected colors at different times of day, how the golden ratio appeared in facial features. The battle scene remained unfinished, but the portrait consumed him. By 1516, when Francis I of France offered Leonardo sanctuary at Amboise, the painting had become almost a living thing. It traveled with him across the Alps, carefully protected, still unfinished in his mind, though others saw perfection. In his final years, as his right hand became paralyzed, he would sit for hours just looking at it, seeing things no one else could see. The portrait's power lies not just in its beauty, but in its demonstration of Leonardo's core belief that deep enough observation reveals the universal patterns connecting all things. In Lisa's smile, he captured not just an expression, but the very nature of human emotion. In the landscape behind her, he showed not just rocks and rivers, but time itself shaping the world. It was both portrait and proof, evidence that art, when driven by deep enough understanding, could reveal the hidden order underlying all of creation. When Leonardo died in 1519, the painting was still in his possession, still technically unfinished in his perfectionist mind. He had transformed a merchant's wife into an eternal mystery, not through artistic tricks, but through the deepest scientific investigation of how humans see and what makes us human. The smile that continues to captivate millions isn't magic. It's mathematics, anatomy, optics, and psychology, all working together in perfect harmony. Leonardo's dreams of flight. On a windswept hill outside Milan in 1496, a servant boy strapped on a pair of wooden wings while Leonardo frantically checked the leather harnesses. The device was the product of 12 years studying birds, and now, but at the last moment, Leonardo stopped the test. In his notebook that night, he sketched what would have happened. The boy's arms would have been torn from their sockets. "I have tested the theories," he wrote. "Now I must test my conscience." This near disaster marked a turning point in Leonardo's quest to conquer the air. He abandoned the dream of directly mimicking birds and began pursuing deeper truths about flight. In the margins of his notebooks, a revolution in aerodynamics took shape. His breakthrough came through an unlikely source, leaves falling in a courtyard. While others saw mere debris, Leonardo observed that broad leaves didn't fall straight down. They spiraled, creating their own lift. He filled pages with diagrams tracking their descent patterns, discovering principles of air resistance that wouldn't be formally understood until the 20th century. The true genius emerged in his study methods. He built water flumes to observe how air might flow around wing shapes, using smoke streams to make invisible air currents visible. His notebooks show the first known depictions of turbulence patterns and vortex behavior. When he wrote that, "A bird is an instrument working according to mathematical law," he wasn't speaking poetically. He had measured and documented exactly how each feather contributed to flight. High in the Alps, Leonardo made a discovery that transformed his understanding. Watching eagles ride thermal currents, he realized that much of their flight involved no wing movement at all. His subsequent drawings show the first accurate depictions of how birds use air pressure differences above and below their wings, the basic principle of lift that would later make modern aviation possible. His workshop became an aviary of mechanical wonders. Wooden models of wings lined the walls, each testing different principles. He invented a device to measure wind speed and direction, another to test the strength of different wing materials. One notebook shows designs for a primitive wind tunnel, complete with calculations about air resistance that wouldn't be verified until centuries later. The most remarkable invention was his mechanical bird. Unlike earlier attempts to simply mimic flapping wings, this device incorporated everything he had learned about aerodynamics. The wings could change shape during flight, just as he had observed real birds doing. The tail section moved to control direction. Most incredibly, he designed internal gears that would automatically adjust the wing angles based on air pressure, a primitive version of the control surfaces used in modern aircraft. In 1502, Leonardo's studies took an unexpected turn through his work on stage machinery. While designing flying angels for a theatrical production, he created what may have been history's first vertical wind tunnel. The device used heated air rising through a narrow chamber to suspend small objects, allowing him to study their behavior in airflow. His notes from these experiments contain the first known descriptions of aerodynamic stall. The culmination of these studies was his codex on the flight of birds, not just a record of observations, but a systematic investigation into the mechanics of flight. He discovered how birds use their tails for steering, how they adjust wing shape for different maneuvers, and how they exploit air currents for efficient travel. Most remarkably, he understood that air itself was a fluid that followed mathematical laws. His final designs show an astonishing leap forward. Gone were the flapping mechanisms of earlier years, replaced by glider designs that anticipated modern aircraft. He sketched parachutes that would work perfectly if built today, helicopters that demonstrated basic rotor principles, and even a primitive hang glider complete with a harness for the pilot. But Leonardo's most profound insight came through failure. After countless experiments, he concluded that human muscles weren't strong enough to power flight directly. Rather than abandon the dream, He began designing machines that would augment human capability, arguably inventing the entire field of human factors, engineering in the process. In his late notebooks appear designs for flying machines that seem to leap centuries ahead, wings with adjustable surfaces, stabilizers that could be controlled by the pilot, and devices for measuring altitude and airspeed. He even sketched a primitive ejection seat, showing the same concern for safety that had saved that servant boy years earlier. The most poignant drawings come from his final years. In trembling lines drawn with his left hand as his right became paralyzed, he sketched birds soaring effortlessly above the French countryside. Next to one, he wrote, "Once you have tasted flight, you will forever walk the earth with your eyes turned skyward." He had never achieved his dream of human flight, but he had laid the groundwork for others to follow. 4 centuries later, when the Wright brothers finally conquered the air, they unknowingly validated many of Leonardo's theories. Their wing-warping technique for controlling flight. Leonardo had sketched it in 1490. Their understanding of lift and drag. He had documented it through his water experiments. Even their decision to master gliding before attempting powered flight followed his logic. The true marvel isn't that Leonardo dreamed of flight. Humans had done that since antiquity. It's that he approached it scientifically, breaking down the seemingly magical ability of birds into understandable, replicable principles. In doing so, he didn't just imagine human flight, he made it theoretically possible, creating the conceptual framework that would eventually make the dream real. Leonardo's enigmatic notebooks. A single page from Leonardo's notebooks can contain multitudes. A fetus in the womb shares space with designs for war machines. Studies of flowing water curl around calculations for cathedral domes. Anatomical drawings merge into mechanical inventions. But the true revolution lies in his decision to write everything in mirror script, flowing right to left, a choice that kept his discoveries private for centuries while creating one of history's most enigmatic literary treasures. In 1495, a German traveler witnessed Leonardo at work. His left hand moves across the page as swift as thought itself, each letter perfectly formed though backwards, while his right sketches simultaneously. Different subjects, different scales, as if 2 minds worked through one body. This ambidextrous capability wasn't mere showmanship. It reflected Leonardo's belief that understanding required both analysis and synthesis, word and image, working in perfect harmony. The notebook's organization defied conventional logic. Rather than separate subjects into different volumes, Leonardo intentionally mixed disciplines on each page. A study of bird wings might lead to designs for church architecture, which in turn sparked observations about the flow of blood through heart valves. These seemingly random juxtapositions reveal deep patterns connecting disparate phenomena, what he called the harmony of the world. His paper choices were deliberate experiments. Some pages used specially prepared surfaces that could capture the finest details of silver point drawing. Others were treated with oils to become translucent, allowing him to layer drawings and study how forms transformed. He developed his own inks with varying viscosities, some so fine they could record the smallest tremor of his hand. The notebooks contain technological prophecies that border on the incredible. In one corner of a page devoted to human anatomy appears a tiny sketch of what we'd now recognize as a contact lens. Nearby, calculations describe the principles of jet propulsion. A study of light reflection includes notes about using concave mirrors to heat water, essentially describing solar power. Each innovation emerged not from random inspiration, but from deep observation of natural phenomena. Some pages remain mysterious even today. His studies of water movement included descriptions of what modern physics would call quantum turbulence. His anatomical drawings showed structures in the human heart that wouldn't be officially discovered until the 1970s. Pages devoted to optics contain calculations that anticipate aspects of relativity theory, all encoded in his distinctive mirror writing. The notebooks reveal an inventor centuries ahead of his time. Hidden among studies of human proportion are designs for an automated weaving machine that anticipated the Industrial Revolution by 300 years. His mechanical studies included the first known designs for ball bearings, reciprocating motion, and constant velocity joints. One page shows a primitive odometer, another contains sketches for a steam-powered rotation device. But perhaps most remarkable are his methods of investigation. Leonardo developed a systematic approach to understanding phenomena that anticipated the scientific method: careful observation, hypothesis formation, experimental testing, and documentation of results. His notes include detailed procedures for replicating his experiments, complete with warnings about potential pitfalls. The tragedy lies in what was lost. Of the estimated 50,000 notebook pages Leonardo produced, only about 7,000 survive. Entire volumes on subjects like geology and botany vanished. His comprehensive treatise on water, which reportedly contained discoveries about fluid dynamics that wouldn't be rediscovered until the 20th century, disappeared entirely. Yet even the fragments that remain reveal a mind operating at the edge of human capability. Some pages contain evidence of profound personal struggles. Amid technical drawings appear lists of self-recriminations. Tell me if anything was ever done. Why do you not work? These rare glimpses of doubt humanize the genius, showing how even Leonardo grappled with procrastination and self-criticism. His coding system went beyond mirror writing. Leonardo developed a private shorthand that mixed symbols from multiple languages, mathematical notation, and his own invented characters. Recent analysis suggests some pages contain layered meanings, drawings that reveal different information when viewed from various angles or under different light conditions. The notebook's influence extends into unexpected areas. His studies of human proportion included the first accurate drawings of a fetus in utero, revolutionizing medical illustration. His architectural sketches introduced new methods of technical drawing that became standard practice. Even his handwriting, once decoded, revealed innovations in fluid dynamics through the very way he formed his letters. In his final years, Leonardo became increasingly concerned about his notebook's fate. He developed a complex system of cross-referencing between volumes, ensuring that future readers could reconstruct his thought processes. His assistant Francesco Melzi spent decades after Leonardo's death trying to organize the material into coherent treatises, an impossible task given the intentionally interconnected nature of the work. Modern technology continues to reveal new layers of meaning in the notebooks. Multispectral imaging has uncovered previously invisible drawings and notes. Computer analysis has identified patterns in his organization that suggest additional levels of encoded information. Each discovery reinforces what readers across centuries have found. These weren't just records of genius, but a new way of seeing and understanding the world. The notebooks remain Leonardo's most intimate legacy, not just a record of what he discovered, but how he thought. They reveal a mind that refused to accept traditional boundaries between disciplines, that saw connections where others saw only chaos, that pushed constantly against the limits of human knowledge. In their pages, art becomes science, observation becomes invention, and the mysteries of the universe reveal themselves one careful drawing at a time. Leonardo's final years, a legacy of interdisciplinary genius. Francis I of France found Leonardo in Rome in 1516, hunched over a dissection table at 3 in the morning, his left hand racing across paper as he documented the branching patterns of human nerves. The young king, barely half Leonardo's age, watched in fascination as the artist-scientist sketched anatomical structures no human eye had previously documented. By dawn, Francis had made his decision. Leonardo must come to France. The journey across the Alps became Leonardo's final great observational expedition. Despite his partially paralyzed right hand, he filled notebooks with studies of mountain erosion patterns and cloud formation. At one point, he demanded his entourage stop so he could examine a peculiar fossil embedded in a rock face. His notes correctly theorized that these mountains had once been seabed, an insight centuries ahead of geological science. Clos Lucé, the manor house Francis provided near his chateau at Amboise, became Leonardo's last laboratory. The king gave him complete freedom to pursue his studies, asking only that he be allowed to visit daily to discuss ideas. Their conversations, recorded fragmentarily in Leonardo's notebooks, ranged from hydraulic engineering to the mathematics of music, from theories of light to the possibility of human flight. But time was growing short, and Leonardo knew it. He launched into a frenzy of organization and experimentation. His right hand might be failing, but his mind raced ahead. He began distilling decades of research into fundamental principles, searching for the underlying mathematical patterns that connected all natural phenomena. In these final months, Leonardo made some of his most startling discoveries. His studies of river erosion led him to understand principles of chaos theory that wouldn't be formalized until the 1960s. His investigations of light and shadow contained calculations that anticipated aspects of quantum mechanics. In one remarkable notebook entry, he correctly described how the moon's gravity affected Earth's oceans 2 centuries before Newton. Francis ordered his royal architects to construct whatever Leonardo designed. The result was a series of remarkable hydraulic experiments in the chateau's gardens. Leonardo created artificial whirlpools to study fluid dynamics, built precise water clocks to measure time's flow, and designed fountains that demonstrated principles of hydraulic pressure. One device, particularly beloved by the king, created artificial rainbows using precisely calibrated water droplets. Leonardo's workshop became a place of both innovation and preservation. He trained a team of young artists and engineers, teaching them not just techniques but his entire approach to observation and investigation. Together they built working models of his mechanical inventions, conducted anatomical studies, and documented everything in precise detail. As his health declined, Leonardo became increasingly focused on questions of legacy. He developed new methods for preserving anatomical specimens, created more detailed cross-referencing systems for his notebooks, and wrote encrypted instructions for future investigators. Some pages from this period contain notes written in multiple directions, creating layers of meaning that could only be decoded by understanding the relationships between different observations. His final project was characteristically ambitious, a comprehensive theory unifying all natural phenomena through mathematical principles. The surviving fragments suggest he was approaching insights about energy conservation and wave propagation that wouldn't be formally discovered for centuries. One particularly cryptic page contains calculations that seem to describe principles of relativistic physics. In his last weeks, Leonardo became obsessed with water, not just its flow and behavior, but its very nature. His final notebooks contain microscopic studies of water droplets, theories about molecular structure, and observations about surface tension that anticipate modern fluid dynamics. One entry reads, "In the ripples of the smallest pool lies the pattern of the entire ocean." The end came in May 1519. According to Francis's court chronicler, Leonardo spent his final days refining his theories, making observations until he could no longer hold a pen. The king himself reportedly cradled Leonardo's head as he died. Though this may be court legend, it speaks to the unique relationship between the aging genius and his royal patron. What followed was both tragedy and triumph. Many notebooks were lost in the subsequent centuries, scattered across Europe or destroyed. Yet enough survived to revolutionize multiple fields of study. His anatomical drawings, when finally published, transformed medical understanding. His mechanical principles influenced engineering for centuries. His theories about light and perception continue to inform new discoveries. But perhaps Leonardo's greatest legacy wasn't in any specific discovery or invention. It was his demonstration that the boundaries between disciplines are artificial, that art, science, engineering, and mathematics are all aspects of a single quest to understand the universe's underlying patterns. His final writings repeatedly stress this theme, that true knowledge comes not from memorizing facts, but from observing nature with both analytical precision and artistic sensitivity. In his last known written words, Leonardo seemed to glimpse something of his future influence. I have offended God and mankind because my work didn't reach the quality it should have. Yet history would prove him wrong. His quest to understand everything, to find the mathematical poetry in all natural phenomena, would inspire generations of future investigators. Even today, researchers in fields from fluid dynamics to robotics find themselves rediscovering principles that Leonardo documented centuries ago. The Renaissance man died, but the Renaissance he embodied, the belief that human understanding knows no boundaries, lives on. In his relentless pursuit of knowledge, his fusion of art and science, his insistence that truth lies in careful observation rather than ancient texts, Leonardo created something entirely new. The modern investigator, the person who dares to question everything and seeks answers in nature itself. Leonardo's enduring influence, the universal legacy. In 2019, exactly 500 years after Leonardo's death, a team of engineers at Stanford University made a startling discovery. While testing a new type of fluid dynamics sensor, they encountered wave patterns that seemed impossible, until someone recalled a sketch from Leonardo's notebooks showing identical formations. The diagram, drawn with simple pen and paper, had captured phenomena so complex that modern supercomputers struggle to model them. This wasn't an isolated incident. The previous year, heart surgeons in Milan discovered that Leonardo's drawings of aortic valve movements perfectly predicted turbulence patterns only visible with modern magnetic resonance imaging. His sketches of maple seeds spinning through air are now helping engineers design better drone propulsion systems. His studies of how birds adjust their wings during flight inform the development of autonomous aircraft. But perhaps the most profound validation of Leonardo's methods came from an unexpected source: artificial intelligence. When researchers began developing machine learning systems to recognize patterns in complex data, they found themselves reinventing principles Leonardo had discovered through pure observation. His technique of studying phenomena across different scales, from the swirl of water around a twig to the flow of entire rivers, anticipates modern fractal analysis. In 2021, materials scientists at MIT created a new type of fiber based on Leonardo's studies of wood grain structure. His observations about how trees distribute stress through their branches led to breakthrough designs in earthquake-resistant architecture. Urban planners studying sustainable city development found themselves returning to his theories about the mathematical relationships between transportation networks and natural systems. Leonardo's influence extends into realms he never could have imagined. His studies of human perception inform the design of virtual reality systems. His investigations of light and shadow help computer graphics artists create more realistic digital environments. Even his mistakes proved instructive. His unsuccessful flying machines demonstrate principles about the relationship between scale and function that now guide the development of nanotechnology. The art world continues to reveal new depths in his work. In 2018, advanced scanning techniques discovered previously invisible layers in the Mona Lisa, showing how Leonardo built up surfaces with techniques that anticipate modern holography. Conservators studying The Last Supper found that his experimental mixing of tempera and oil, while ultimately causing deterioration, created optical effects that couldn't be achieved any other way. Modern neuroscience has begun to understand why Leonardo's art affects viewers so powerfully. His technique of slightly blurring edges, sfumato, exploits the way human visual cortexes process information. The mysterious quality of his portraits stems from his deep understanding of how different parts of the brain handle facial recognition. He wasn't just painting what he saw, he was engineering viewers' perceptual experiences. Silicon Valley entrepreneurs study his notebooks for insights into innovation. His habit of crossing disciplines, his willingness to abandon conventional wisdom, his combination of analytical rigor and creative imagination, these qualities define the modern pursuit of breakthrough technologies. Startups now speak of Leonardo-style thinking to describe approaches that combine scientific precision with artistic vision. Environmental scientists find his integrated view of nature increasingly relevant. His understanding of how water shapes landscapes, how atmospheric conditions affect light, how living systems interconnect. These insights help inform responses to climate change. His drawings of turbulent floodwaters inform modern flood control systems. His studies of botanical growth patterns help track forest recovery after wildfires. The notebooks themselves continue to yield surprises. Quantum physicists found his descriptions of light behavior contain insights about wave-particle duality. His anatomical studies reveal structures in the human nervous system that weren't officially discovered until the advent of electron microscopes. Even his geographical observations, long dismissed as fanciful, accurately describe geological processes that weren't understood until the 20th century. Leonardo's greatest legacy may be methodological. His insistence on direct observation over received wisdom, his systematic documentation of experiments, his use of drawing as an investigative tool, these approaches define modern scientific practice. His habit of looking for patterns across different phenomena, of seeing connections between seemingly unrelated fields, becomes increasingly valuable as science tackles complex global challenges. In a world of increasing specialization, Leonardo reminds us of the power of interdisciplinary thinking. His unity of art and science, of observation and imagination, of theory and practice, offers a model for approaching contemporary problems. Climate change, artificial intelligence, space exploration. These challenges require the kind of integrated thinking Leonardo pioneered. Perhaps most importantly, Leonardo shows us that innovation doesn't require modern technology. His primary tools were careful observation, systematic documentation, and relentless curiosity. His examples suggest that the next breakthrough might come not from more powerful computers or larger laboratories, but from learning to see the world more clearly. As humanity faces unprecedented challenges, Leonardo's approach becomes more relevant, not less. His ecological awareness, his systematic thinking, his integration of multiple disciplines. These aren't historical artifacts, but vital tools for understanding and shaping our future. 5 centuries after his death, the universal man still has much to teach us about how to see, think, and create. The final validation of Leonardo's methods may lie not in what he discovered, but in what he inspired others to seek. Each generation finds in his work new relevance, new insights, new directions for investigation. His greatest invention wasn't any particular machine or technique, but a way of thinking that continues to evolve and generate discoveries. Leonardo himself might have appreciated this ongoing influence. In one of his last notebook entries, he wrote, "I know that many will call this useless work, but my works will be of use to restrained investigators who consider how each element connects to all others." 5 centuries later, those connections continue to illuminate new paths toward understanding our world.